I'm Natalie Parker, 34, and I built a tech empire from nothing but determination and resentment. Growing up as the poor relation at my wealthy uncle's annual family gatherings taught me humiliation comes in designer packaging. Every summer, I'd return to that mansion, swallowing my pride with champagne I couldn't afford. This year would be different. After a decade of their sidelong glances and backhanded compliments, I had a surprise that would arrive with the subtlety of the Bell 429 helicopter I now piloted. Before I tell you how I finally stood up to my family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and buckle up. This revenge story has a vertical takeoff. My childhood in South Boston was worlds away from the immaculate suburbs where my Uncle James and his family lived. Our three-bedroom apartment above a convenience store felt enormous to me until I was 7 years old. The first time I visited Uncle James's home in Brookline. That day changed how I viewed everything. My father worked as a mechanic at a local garage. His hands were constantly stained with grease no amount of scrubbing could remove. He'd come home exhausted, but would still find the energy to swing me around the living room or help with my science projects. Mom was a secretary at the elementary school I attended, which meant I couldn't get away with anything the other kids could. Between their salaries, we lived comfortably enough, bills paid, food on the table, occasional trips to the movies on discount Tuesdays. Uncle James, my father's older brother, had a completely different life. He'd started in real estate during the boom and expanded into various investments I wouldn't understand until much later. His Tudor-style mansion sat on 4 acres with manicured gardens, an indoor pool, and a wine cellar larger than our entire apartment. My Aunt Diane, with her perfect blonde highlights and tennis instructor physique, always greeted us with air kisses and comments about how refreshingly simple our lives must be. Their children, my cousins Brittany and Tyler, became the measuring sticks against which I constantly came up short. Brittany, 3 years older, had her own horse by age 10 and spent summers in Europe. Tyler, just a year older than me, had every gaming system available and a closet packed with clothes with tags I'd only seen in magazines. The first family gathering I clearly remember was my uncle's 40th birthday celebration. Mom had taken me shopping at the mall for a special dress, and I felt like a princess in its puffy sleeves and shiny fabric. That feeling disappeared when Brittany pointed out the synthetic material and asked loudly if we'd gotten it at one of those discount places. I didn't understand this slight then, but I felt the sting anyway. At 10 years old, during the annual summer gathering, I wandered through the house looking for a bathroom and overheard Aunt Diane talking to another elegantly dressed woman in the kitchen. "James is so generous inviting his brother's family every year," she said, refilling her wine glass. "It must be good for the children to see how the other half lives, though I sometimes wonder if it's cruel, giving the charity cases a taste of what they'll never have." The woman laughed and I stood frozen. The word charity burning into my consciousness. I didn't completely understand what it meant, but I understood enough to know we were being pitied. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, with its canopy bed and silk sheets, making a silent promise that someday I would never be anyone's charity case again. School became my battlefield. I threw myself into studies with an intensity that sometimes concerned my parents. While they encouraged education, they didn't understand my desperate need to excel, to earn every scholarship and accolade possible. By 13, I'd mapped out my entire academic future. Top grades, key extracurriculars, strategic volunteer work, all calculated to maximize my chances at a full ride to a prestigious university. Uncle James established himself as the family patriarch early on. At gatherings, everyone orbited around him seeking approval or financial advice. He dictated where people sat, when activities would happen, and which topics were appropriate for discussion. Success in his world had one measure: wealth accumulated and displayed. My father, the younger brother who'd chosen a blue-collar life, was treated with a kind of benevolent condescension that made my blood boil even as a child. As I grew older, the family dynamics became more obvious. Cousin Brittany evolved from a bratty child into a calculated social climber, engaged by 22, to the son of one of Uncle James's business associates. Her expressions of sympathy toward me always carried an undercurrent of superiority. "Natalie, that scholarship is so impressive. It must be such a relief for your parents not having to worry about tuition. We're all just so proud of you making the best of your circumstances." Tyler developed into exactly what you'd expect: entitled, lazy, and completely oblivious to his privilege. He failed upward through private schools, eventually landing a VP position at one of Uncle James's companies, despite having no qualifications beyond his last name. Each family gathering became increasingly uncomfortable as the class differences grew more pronounced. By high school, I developed strategies for survival: arrive late, leave early, bring a book to escape into, and perfect the art of the polite but vague response to invasive questions about my future prospects. Uncle James never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that his generosity made these gatherings possible. "Family is everything," he'd proclaim during his inevitable dinner-time speeches, champagne in hand. "No matter how different our paths, we must remember blood ties us together. Some of us may have been more fortunate." At this point, his gaze would invariably fall on my parents and me, but we're all Parkers in the end. The subtext was obvious. There was a hierarchy in the Parker family, and we were at the bottom. But hierarchies, as I would later discover in business, are rarely as stable as they seem. Getting into MIT on a full scholarship felt like my first real victory. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and I still remember my mother's tears as she called everyone we knew. That night, my father brought home a bottle of champagne, a rarity in our household, and we toasted to possibilities. The celebration at the next family gathering was considerably more restrained. Uncle James congratulated me with a pat on the shoulder and immediately launched into a story about his golf buddy, whose son had gotten into Harvard the traditional way. The implication wasn't lost on anyone. College was a shock to my system. For the first time, I wasn't the smartest person in the room. My classmates came from prep schools with advanced courses I'd never had access to, and many had been coding since childhood while I taught myself on public library computers. The first semester was brutal. Long nights struggling to catch up, mornings where imposter syndrome threatened to drown me, and the constant awareness that while other students could afford to fail, my scholarship depended on maintaining a certain GPA. I worked 3 part-time jobs simultaneously, shelving books at the campus library in the mornings, tutoring high school students in math on weekends, and monitoring computer labs overnight. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, but the alternative, calling my parents for money they didn't have, or worse, approaching Uncle James for a small loan, was unthinkable. It was during a particularly grueling all-nighter in the computer science building that I met Lucas Chen. He found me asleep on my keyboard at 4 a.m., a half-empty coffee cup cold beside me. Instead of walking past, he sat down and helped me debug the program I'd been battling with for hours. By sunrise, we'd not only fixed my assignment, but discovered a shared fascination with network security vulnerabilities. Lucas became my first true friend at MIT, and eventually my business partner. The son of Chinese immigrants who ran a restaurant in California, he understood my ambition in a way my wealthy classmates couldn't. We spent countless hours discussing the weaknesses in existing cybersecurity systems and imagining solutions that hadn't been attempted. "The problem with current approaches," Lucas would say, during our late-night coding sessions, "is they're all defensive. We need to think like the attackers, but stay one step ahead." By junior year, we had outlined a business plan for what would eventually become Parker and Security Solutions. The vision thrilled us, but finding anyone to take us seriously proved nearly impossible. Venture capitalists wanted experienced teams, not 2 college kids with untested ideas. Graduation arrived with honors, but without job offers matching our ambitions. While classmates accepted 6-figure positions at established tech companies, Lucas and I moved into an apartment in Cambridge with plumbing problems and unreliable heating. We lived on ramen noodles and determination, coding day and night to build our prototype security system. That summer coincided with cousin Brittany's lavish wedding at the Parkers' summer home in Cape Cod. I couldn't afford a proper gift or the designer outfit expected for such occasions. Instead, I wore a dress from a consignment shop and brought a handmade gift, a custom-coded digital photo frame that could pull and display images from the cloud, something not yet available commercially. The wedding was a parade of wealth and connections. Guests included state senators, CEOs, and even a minor European royal. I was seated at what was clearly the leftover table, with distant relatives no one quite remembered, and the photographer's assistant. Throughout the reception, I caught glimpses of my immediate family, similarly scattered at undesirable tables far from the wedding party. During the rehearsal dinner, Uncle James had everyone's attention as he gave an impromptu speech about success and family legacy. After a meandering introduction, he gestured toward me with his wineglass. "Take my niece Natalie, for example," he announced to the room of strangers and acquaintances. Brilliant girl, top of her class at MIT, but a perfect example of what happens when you chase impractical dreams instead of building on solid foundations. All that education to end up unemployed and starting some internet business. He chuckled, and others joined in. Sometimes the best lessons for the young are seeing what not to do. No offense, Natalie, I'm sure you'll figure it out eventually and come work for a real company. The humiliation burned through me as heads turned and eyes filled with either pity or amusement. My parents stared at their plates, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge Uncle James in his domain. That night, in the small guest house where we'd been placed, far from the main property where important guests stayed, I made another silent vow. Not only would I succeed, but I would do it so definitively that no one in the family could ever dismiss me again. The months following Brittany's wedding were the darkest of our entrepreneurial journey. 3 potential investors backed out at the last minute. Lucas and I had a serious fight about direction that nearly ended our partnership. My student loans entered repayment, adding financial pressure to an already precarious situation. I picked up bartending shifts at a local pub just to make rent while still coding 60 hours a week. There were moments I almost gave up. One particularly bad night, after receiving our 15th rejection email, I called my mother in tears. "Maybe Uncle James is right," I said, sitting on our apartment fire escape to get better phone reception. "Maybe I should just apply for entry-level positions at established firms." My mother's response surprised me. Normally encouraging, but practical, she instead showed rare anger. "Natalie Parker, you listen to me. Your uncle has spent his entire life measuring success by the wrong metrics. He has a beautiful